The cordless phone slipped from my grip, clattering onto the saltillo tile floor when I heard my own daughter, Tiffany, say those words that split my soul clean in two. Of course, I'm not inviting my mother. Can you imagine the scene she'll make in front of Chadwick's family? Her voice was so brittle, so calculating, like she was talking about getting rid of an old lumpy sofa that didn't match her new decor. I stood there frozen in the hallway of my own house, the receiver lying on the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might just give up and explode. 64 years of life, 8 of them as a widow, and 38 years being a mother to that creature, only to find out she saw me as nothing more than an embarrassment. The conversation buzzed on from the discarded handset. Tiffany was talking to someone, probably Brittany, my daughter-in-law, that wannabe Instagram influencer who lives to post filtered photos of the Calabasas house I bought for my son Kevin. You know how mom is. Tiffany's voice tinny and distant. She'll show up in some tacky dress from Kohl's on clearance. And God, her accent. Can you imagine her trying to talk to Chadwick's mother? Harrison is a diplomat, for crying out loud. His mother was a former Miss Texas in the 80s. They'll think we're a bunch of hicks. A bunch of hicks. Had she forgotten that it was this hick's hard work that paid for her to get an architecture degree from USC? That thanks to me waking up at the crack of dawn for decades, flipping houses back in Texas before anyone even called it that, she could now afford to be choosy with her Beverly Hills clients? My legs felt like jelly, and I had to lean against the wall, the very wallpaper Tiffany had insisted I get last year. Let's update your house, Mom. Give it a more modern Californian feel, she'd said. Now it felt like a slap in the face. Everything in this house, from the foundation to the roof, screamed of the money I had earned with my own 2 calloused hands. The same money she and her brother spent like it was going out of style. Besides, Tiffany went on, letting out a tight, nervous little laugh that sent a chill down my spine. You know she'll talk too loud. She'll tell some mortifying story about us when we were kids. It's enough that Chadwick accepts where we come from. We don't need a live demonstration. The receiver was still on the floor, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Every single word was a fresh dagger twisting in my chest. This was the same little girl who used to climb into my bed, trembling after a nightmare. The same one who'd sob in my arms because the other kids at her private school made fun of her off-brand sneakers. The same one who swore up and down that when she grew up, she'd buy me a big house and take care of me forever. Kevin agrees with me, Tiffany continued, and that was the blow that almost buckled my knees. He also thinks it's better if Mom doesn't come. It's going to be awkward enough explaining why Dad isn't here. We don't need any more drama. Kevin, my boy, the son I practically carried for his first 2 years because he was so sickly. The same one I put through law school at UCLA, and bought his first condo for when he married that vapid Brittany. Both of them, my 2 children, had come to a consensus. I was an embarrassment. Tiffany's laugh, thin and sharp, echoed from the phone. The best part is she'll barely even notice. She's been so out of it lately. So, old. She probably won't even remember there's a wedding. That's when it happened. Something deep inside me, a steel beam I didn't even know was there, didn't just crack, it shattered. It wasn't just the exclusion. It wasn't just the shame. It was the condescension. The utter underestimation. They thought I was some foolish, senile old woman they could just manage and manipulate as they pleased. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I was not the clueless old lady they pictured. I was Martha Callahan, the woman who had turned a $5,000 loan from a dusty Fort Worth credit union into a real estate empire of 20 properties across 3 states. I was the woman who had raised 2 children all by herself after their father, Frank, died, working 18-hour days so they would never, ever want for anything. I reached down and hung up the phone, my movements slow and deliberate, as if it were a delicate piece of crystal. My mind, however, was already racing, firing on all cylinders just like it used to back in the old days when I had to navigate a housing market crash or stare down a contractor who thought he could rip me off because I was a woman. I had learned a long, long time ago that revenge is a dish best served cold, and patience is the most powerful weapon a smart woman can wield. I walked to my study, that little sanctuary filled with filing cabinets and property deeds that my children had always avoided like it was radioactive. Mom's boring papers, Tiffany used to call them. How ironic that those boring papers were the very ink that had written the story of her luxurious life. I fired up my old desktop computer and began to go through the bank records, reviewing all the transfers I had made in the last 5 years. Tiffany, down payment for a luxury condo in Beverly Hills, $400,000. Kevin, house in a Calabasas gated community, $600,000. Tiffany, again BMW 5 Series lease buyout, $80,000. Kevin, wedding expenses for Brittany, because her parents couldn't afford the venue she wanted, $200,000. Tiffany, master's degree program in Italy, $100,000. The list went on, a digital testament to my foolishness. And every single transfer was preceded by a sweet, manipulative justification. Mom, it's an investment in my future brand. It's just that Brittany's pregnant, and we need more space for our family. It'll just be a loan, I swear. I'll pay you back in 6 months. Loans that were never repaid. Investments that only ever paid dividends to them. As I stared at the numbers, I remembered exactly how the whole circus started. It was 3 years after Frank's passing. I was shattered, adrift, trying to figure out how to navigate the world alone for the first time in my life. Tiffany had come home from her fancy architecture firm with tears welling in her eyes. Mom, I've been offered a huge opportunity at work, but I need to look the part. I need to network. Could you help me with a small loan to build a professional capsule wardrobe? A small loan of $30,000. For clothes. But I'd said yes. Because seeing her cry tore my heart out. Because I wanted her to have all the opportunities one never did. That was my first mistake. Confusing money with love. Then came Kevin. Mom, Brittany and I want to start a family, but this condo is just too small. The market in LA is insane. Could you help us with the down payment? Just the down payment, will handle the rest. Of course, 6 months later they were back. It's just that the monthly payments are suffocating us, and Brittany had to quit her job because the pregnancy was high risk. In the end, I paid off the entire house. The pattern was always the same. They'd show up with a sad story, an urgent need, a promise of future independence. This is the last time, Mom, I swear. After this, we won't bother you again. It's just until we get on our feet. Sweet lies wrapped in cheek kisses and calculated hugs. But I had been the stupid one. I had mistaken their desperate need for my money for genuine love. I had believed I was a generous, supportive mother, when in reality, I was nothing more than an emotional ATM. They came, pushed the right sequence of buttons, guilt, love, pity, and I spat out cash. The most painful revelation came when I found the credit card statements for the cards I'd put in their names, for emergencies. Tiffany had spent $50,000 last month. Kevin $40,000. On what? Nobu, Malibu, Gucci on Rodeo Drive, weekend getaways to Napa. They lived like multimillionaires on my dime while I continued to buy my jeans at Costco and cook at home to save a buck. The phone rang, making me jump. It was Tiffany. Hey Mom. How are you? Her voice was now syrupy sweet, dripping with affection. A complete 180 from the tone she'd used an hour earlier to discuss me like I was a piece of garbage to be disposed of. Hey, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come over to my place tomorrow? It's about the wedding. Of course, sweetheart. I'll be there tomorrow, I replied, my voice the perfect imitation of the loving, slightly clueless mother she expected. But inside, a cold, hard smile was forming on my lips. I knew exactly what Tiffany wanted to discuss. It wasn't my presence at her wedding. It was my money to finance it. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I was up until 3 in the morning cross-referencing every document, every contract, every bank transfer. My brain worked like a well-oiled machine, calculating years of misplaced generosity and unrequited love. But I was also planning. Because if there was one thing I learned in my decades as a businesswoman, it was that information is power. And I, Martha Callahan, had a hell of a lot of information. The next day, I arrived at Tiffany's Beverly Hills condo at exactly 10 a.m., just as we'd agreed. I wore my simplest dress, the one from Macy's she despised, and carried my worn-out faux leather handbag. I wanted to look precisely like the harmless old woman they thought I was. Tiffany greeted me with a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and deceit. Mom, I'm so glad you came. Sit down, I made you coffee. She served it in one of the delicate porcelain cups I had given her for her birthday, part of a set that cost more than my first car. Everything in her apartment screamed sterile luxury. The minimalist Italian furniture, the gigantic flat-screen TV that looked like a movie screen, the abstract art on the walls that looked like a toddler had thrown paint around. My money transformed into objects designed to impress strangers. Look, Mom. I wanted to talk to you about the wedding. Tiffany sat across from me, crossing her long legs with a studied elegance that looked exhausting. You know, Chadwick and I want something very special, very elegant. His family is very distinguished. There was that word again. Distinguished. As if I were some generic store-brand product that needed to be hidden in the back of the pantry, so I wouldn't ruin the aesthetic of her premium organic lifestyle. I just nodded, feigning the foolish, doting smile she expected. The problem is, the costs have just skyrocketed. Way more than we anticipated. The venue we want, a vineyard in Napa, costs $200,000 just for the rental. She paused for dramatic effect, as if the numbers themselves were causing her physical pain. Then there's the catering, the flowers, the music, the photographer. In total, we're talking about almost $800,000. $800,000. It was more money than most families see in a lifetime, and Tiffany said it like she was talking about the price of groceries. I took a slow sip of my coffee, keeping my expression as neutral as a West Texas landscape. Chadwick has put in his share, of course, she continued, fidgeting with the massive diamond on her ring finger, a nervous habit she'd had since she was a little girl caught in a lie. And his family is contributing too, but we need another calculated pause. We need you to cover the difference. It's about $400,000. $400,000. Said as casually as if she were asking to borrow $20 for gas. I knew perfectly well that Chadwick's family hadn't contributed a single red cent. I knew because I had already done my homework. I know it's a lot of money, Mom, but think of it as an investment in my future. Chadwick has major connections. This wedding could open so many doors for my career. Her voice turned that syrupy, manipulative tone I knew so well. And it'll be the last big favor I ask of you. Promise. After this, we'll be completely independent. The last time. How many times had I heard that phrase? It was a broken record that played every time they needed a cash infusion. The last time I'll bother you, Mom. After this, we won't need anything else. It's the final investment in our future. Lies. All of them lies I had swallowed whole, like a fool in love with the illusion of being needed. And Mom, Tiffany leaned forward, taking my hands in her perfectly manicured ones. Her touch felt cold. I know we haven't officially invited you yet, but that's because we want to surprise you. The truth is, we're planning something very intimate, very family-oriented. Just the closest people. More lies. I had seen the draft of the guest list on her coffee table when I walked in. 250 people. Politicians, tech moguls, socialites, influencers. All the important people Tiffany needed to build her brand as a successful woman. But her own mother was nowhere on that list. I just need you to confirm the money so I can book everything. The vendors are all waiting on deposits, she said, squeezing my hands, feigning a vulnerability she didn't possess. I'm counting on you, Mom. You've always been there for me. She was right about that. I had always been there to pay for her whims, to finance her dreams, to clean up her financial messes. But when I needed emotional support, when I felt so lonely after Frank's death that the silence in my house was a physical weight, when Sundays stretched on into an eternity of emptiness, they were nowhere to be found. Of course, sweetheart, I replied, putting on the same maternal smile I had perfected over decades of practice. You know I'll always support you in everything. Tiffany sighed in relief, a wave of it washing over her face. She had been holding her breath. She had no idea that I already knew the entire sordid truth. You're the best mom in the world, she said, kissing my cheek with lips that tasted of falsehood. I promise this wedding will be perfect. Chadwick is so grateful to you. He's always saying how lucky he is to have such a generous mother-in-law. Chadwick, the perfect fiancé who had never spoken more than 5 consecutive words to me in the 2 years he'd been dating my daughter. The same one who looked visibly uncomfortable every time I came to visit, as if my very presence contaminated the sophisticated atmosphere they'd curated. But my money, of course, my money didn't contaminate anything. That they welcomed with open arms. When I left Tiffany's condo, I drove straight to the office of Jean, my accountant and one of the few true friends I had left in the world. Jean had been Frank's right-hand man in the business, and after his death, he became my most trusted advisor. He was one of the few men I knew who never underestimated me for being a woman. Martha! What a surprise! Is everything all right? Jean stood up from his desk with a genuine smile, the kind I no longer received at home. His office smelled of coffee and old paper, a scent that always calmed me because it reminded me of the days when Frank and I were building our empire together, side by side. Jean, I need you to do me a very special favor. I want you to calculate exactly how much money I've transferred to my children in the last 5 years. Everything. Down to the last damn dollar. I sat across from his desk, my back straight, folding my hands in my lap like the executive I had once been. Jean's brow furrowed. Are you sure, Martha? Those numbers, they can be a shock to the system. He knew my family well. He had been a silent witness to all their requests, all their financial emergencies, that invariably landed on my doorstep. I'm more than sure, I said, my voice firm, all business. It had been years since I'd heard myself speak with such authority. I want exact numbers, dates, and the stated purposes. And then I want you to tell me what my real financial situation would be if I were to cut them off. Cold turkey. Jean worked for 2 solid hours, his fingers flying across the keyboard, reviewing transfers, calculating totals. I sat there in silence, watching as the years of my generosity were converted into cold, brutal figures on a spreadsheet. When he was finished, he swiveled the monitor around. The number at the bottom of the screen took my breath away. In 5 years, Martha, you've given Tiffany and Kevin a combined $2,800,000. He let that sink in. That's not counting the properties you've put in their names, the credit cards you pay off every month, or the life insurance policies of which they are the sole beneficiaries. Jean looked at me with a mixture of compassion and admiration. You are an incredibly generous woman. Generous. What a polite word for what had actually been systematic foolishness. $2.8 million. It was more money than most people earn in their entire working lives, and I had handed it over to 2 people who considered me an embarrassment. Now tell me, Jean, I said, my voice steady, if I were to cut off all financial support right now, today, how long do you think they could last on their own? It was a rhetorical question. We both knew the answer. Tiffany spends more than she earns every month. Her job as an architect pays well, but not enough for the lifestyle she leads. Kevin is in better shape, but with the mortgage on that house, Brittany's spending habits, the luxury cars, I give them 3 months. Tops. Before they're in serious financial trouble. 3 months. All their arrogance, all their shame towards me, all their carefully constructed illusions of independence, would crumble to dust in 3 months without my money. It was valuable information, but it was also devastating. I hadn't raised children. I had created 2 financial monsters who didn't know how to survive without siphoning from my bank account. That night, alone in my quiet house, I made a decision that would change everything. I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive kind Tiffany had given me for my last birthday, paid for with my money, of course. I sat in my favorite armchair, the same one where Frank used to read me the business section of the Wall Street Journal, where we had planned every investment, every strategic move. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Harrison, Chadwick's brother. I had done enough research to know he was a diplomat, a serious and respectable man. If Tiffany was so ashamed of me, it was time for her future in-laws to know exactly who the woman financing their precious wedding was. Good evening, Harrison. This is Martha Callahan, Tiffany's mother. I do apologize for calling so late, but I need to speak with you about something very important regarding your brother's wedding. Harrison's voice sounded surprised but polite. Of course, Mrs. Callahan. Please tell me. How can I help? Well, Harrison, I just need to clarify a few things about the wedding expenses. My daughter mentioned that your family is contributing financially, but I believe there may have been a misunderstanding. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. My voice was sweet, innocent, like a slightly confused old lady who just wanted to avoid any trouble. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Callahan, I'm afraid I don't understand. We haven't agreed to any financial contribution. Chadwick told us that you and Tiffany had everything covered. His voice was laced with genuine confusion. Perfect. Tiffany had lied about that too. Oh my. Well, isn't that strange? I said, feigning surprise. Well, don't you worry your head about it, Harrison. I'll take care of all the expenses as always. I let that last phrase hang in the air. An accidental confession. As always. Harrison, being a diplomat trained to read between the lines, sounded intrigued. Pardon my curiosity, Mrs. Callahan, but have you been financing Tiffany for a long time? There was my opening. Well, a mother does what she has to for her children, doesn't she? Bless her heart. Tiffany's had a few financial challenges. Her condo, her car, that master's program in Europe. We've just handled all of that within the family. I paused for calculated effect. But don't you worry, I have enough properties to cover any expense. Properties. That word always got people's attention. Harrison was a diplomat. He understood the value of real estate. How very generous of you, ma'am. Chadwick never mentioned that Tiffany had any financial needs. Oh, Tiffany is very proud, I said, my voice dripping with false maternal pride. She doesn't like people to know she depends on her mother. But between you and me, Harrison, she couldn't maintain her lifestyle for a week without my help. Every word was a carefully planted time bomb that Tiffany wouldn't see coming. After hanging up, I dialed Kevin's number. It was time to test the loyalty of my younger son, the one who had always been weaker, more easily manipulated than his sister. If there was any chance one of my children was salvageable, it was him. Hey Mom. Is everything okay? It's pretty late. Kevin's voice sounded sleepy, but also tinged with nervousness. Tiffany had probably already called him about our conversation, crowing about securing the money. Kevin, honey, I need to talk to you about something very serious. It's about your sister's wedding. I settled deeper into my armchair, preparing for the performance of my life. Tiffany asked me for money for the wedding. A lot of money. But there's something that's been worrying me. What is it, Mom? Kevin now sounded wide awake. Well, lately I've been thinking a lot about my future, about what will happen to me when I get older. You both have your own lives, your own families. I let my voice crack just slightly, as if I were making a painful confession. Mom, what are you talking about? You're perfectly fine. But I could hear the discomfort in his voice. Kevin knew exactly where this conversation was heading. Yes, I'm fine now. But what about in 5 years? In 10? I don't want to be a burden to any of you. I paused dramatically. I've been thinking about selling some of my properties and moving somewhere smaller. Something I can manage on my own. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in Kevin's head. If I sold the properties, if I moved, if I became financially independent of their needs, his source of extra income, the houses he expected to inherit, the loans he never repaid, the financial safety net I represented, it would all be gone. Mom, don't say things like that. We would never abandon you. You're part of our family. Sweet lies wrapped in poorly disguised panic. Oh, Kevin, that's so good to hear. Because the truth is, sometimes I feel like I'm in the way. Like with Tiffany's wedding. I left the sentence hanging, waiting for him to take the bait. What about Tiffany's wedding? Kevin tried to sound casual, but I knew that voice. It was the same one he used as a boy when he had broken my favorite vase. Well, Tiffany told me they're doing something very intimate, very small. Just the most important people. And I understand, At my age, I don't really fit in at those fancy celebrations. My voice was pure maternal manipulation. A blend of resignation with a hint of martyrdom. Kevin swallowed audibly. Mom, I didn't know Tiffany told you that. There must be some kind of misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, honey. Tiffany was very clear. She says Chadwick's family is very distinguished, very refined. And I'm just an old woman from Texas who doesn't know how to behave in high society. Every word was a dagger aimed straight at his conscience. Mom, that's not true. Kevin stopped. He couldn't complete the sentence without telling a blatant lie, and we both knew it. It's all right, Kevin. I understand perfectly. You've both grown up. You've moved up in the world. It's only natural for you to be ashamed of your mother who comes from nothing. I let that sit for a long moment. I just hope that when I move and sell everything, You'll understand that it was because I wanted to give you both space to shine, without my shadow holding you back. The line was silent for nearly a minute. Kevin was processing the full implications of my words. If I moved, sold the properties, and became independent, they would have to learn to live on their own resources. The gravy train was pulling into its final station. Mom, don't make any rash decisions. Let me talk to Tiffany. There must be a huge misunderstanding here. Kevin's voice was trembling slightly. In the background, I could hear Brittany's sharp, worried voice asking what was wrong. I promise we'll fix this. I don't want you to fight because of me, sweetheart. If Tiffany thinks it's better for me not to go, I respect her decision. After all, it's her special day. My voice was pure maternal resignation, but inside I was smiling. Kevin was panicking, and that meant my plan was working. Mom, we never wanted to hurt you. Let me talk to Tiffany first thing in the morning. Don't do anything until we talk. Okay. Now Kevin sounded desperate. All right, honey. But I already made an important decision today. I told Tiffany I would give her the money for her wedding. It'll be my parting gift, before I simplify my life. The lie dripped from my lips like poisoned honey. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Kevin was processing the fact that Tiffany had asked for, and seemingly secured, $400,000 while simultaneously excluding him from the conversation. The siblings had always competed for my money, but they had learned to coordinate their efforts to maximize their gains. This move broke their alliance. For $400,000? Tiffany asked you for that much? Kevin's voice had changed. There was a note of raw betrayal in it now. Yes, for the venue, the food, the flowers. She says it's going to be a very elegant wedding, I said innocently. I suppose since you're already married, you don't need anything like that, right? Another calculated lie. Kevin and Brittany were always asking for money for something. Renovations, vacations, Brittany's new SUV. Mom, we have expenses too. Brittany's pregnant again, and we're going to need to expand the house. Kevin took the bait perfectly. Brittany's pregnant? What wonderful news. I feigned surprise and delight, though I knew for a fact it was a lie. Brittany had posted photos of herself drinking rose on a yacht just last week on Instagram. Of course, honey, I'll help you with that too. After all, you do include me in your lives. That last phrase was the finishing blow. Kevin understood the message perfectly. Tiffany got money but excluded me. He included me but got nothing. It was an equation that did not work in his favor. I hung up the phone feeling a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in a long time, I was in control of the situation. My children were used to manipulating me, but they had forgotten that I had been a businesswoman long before I was their mother. I knew all the negotiation tactics, all the pressure strategies. The game was on. The next day, bright and early, the show began. Tiffany called me, hysterical at 7 a.m. Mom, what did you say to Kevin? He's furious with me. He says I'm selfish, that I'm cutting him out of everything. Good morning, sweetheart. I don't understand why Kevin is upset. I just told him about your wedding, about how beautiful it's going to be. My voice was that of an innocent old woman who couldn't understand why everyone was yelling. You told him I asked for $400,000. Tiffany was losing her composure, something very rare for her. She had always been so calculating, so cold. Well, it's the truth, isn't it? You asked me for that money just yesterday. I paused innocently. And about Kevin? Well, he asked if he was going to be at the wedding, and I told him it was just for the important people. I thought he already knew. Tiffany cursed under her breath. Mom, Kevin is my brother. Of course, he's invited to my wedding. Oh, that's good to know. So when you said important people, you were only referring to me. I understand. My voice dripped with wounded innocence. No. I mean, Mom, of course you're important. It's just that. Tiffany trailed off, unable to articulate a logical reason why her own mother wasn't important enough for her wedding. It's all right, honey. I got the message loud and clear. That's why I've decided to simplify my life. I spoke with a real estate agent yesterday about selling some of the properties. If you no longer need me as a mother, at least I won't be a financial burden to you. I let those words sink into her brain like acid. You're selling properties? Which properties? Tiffany's voice had lost all pretense of affection. It was now pure, unadulterated financial panic. Well, first the beach house in Malibu, then the downtown apartments. Harrison gave me some very good advice yesterday on how to liquidate assets intelligently. I mentioned Harrison's name casually, as if it had been a routine conversation. You spoke with Harrison? Chadwick's brother? Now Tiffany sounded on the verge of a full-blown heart attack. Yes. What a nice young man. So polite. He explained that his family won't be contributing financially to the wedding. That Chadwick had told them you and I had everything under control. A dramatic pause. He asked a lot of questions about my properties. He seemed very impressed. Tiffany hung up without saying goodbye. I knew she was scrambling to call Chadwick, probably to demand what exactly he had told his family about the Callahan family's financial situation. Over the next 3 days my phone didn't stop ringing. It was like watching a line of dominoes fall, one by one. First Kevin called, trying to convince me to have lunch with him and Brittany to clear the air. Then Tiffany called with a strangely sweet voice, inviting me for coffee to plan the wedding details together. Then Kevin again, offering to take me to my doctor's appointment because I sounded very stressed lately. But the most revealing call came on Thursday night. It was Haley, my 16-year-old granddaughter, Kevin and Brittany's daughter. Her voice sounded different, more mature than usual. Grandma? Can I come over tomorrow after school? I need to talk to you. Haley had always been special. The only one in the family who seemed to have inherited my business instincts and my ability to see through a pile of bull. Of course, sweetheart. Come whenever you want. Haley was my weak spot. The only person in this family who loved me without any financial strings attached. The next day, Haley arrived at my house still in her school uniform, with a serious expression that reminded me of myself at her age. She sat at my kitchen table, refused the iced tea I offered, and got straight to the point. Grandma, Mom and Dad have been talking about you a lot lately, arguing in whispers, and they stop talking whenever I walk into the room. Haley had Frank's eyes that missed no detail. Mom is obsessed with checking her bank accounts online, and Dad just looks super stressed all the time. And what do you think about all that, sweetheart? I asked, genuinely curious about the perspective of the only honest person in this family. I think they're scared you're going to stop supporting them. Haley looked me straight in the eye. And I think it's about time you did. Her words hit me harder than all the desperate, wheedling calls from her parents. Here was a 16-year-old kid who perfectly understood the toxic dynamic I had been feeding for years. Grandma, I've been watching this family my whole life. I've seen how Dad and Aunt Tiffany constantly ask you for money. I've seen how Mom plans expensive purchases right before she knows we're coming to visit you. I see how they all act differently when they need something. Haley spoke with a maturity that broke my heart. And I've also seen how you give them everything without ever asking for anything in return. It's what a mother does, Haley. A grandmother, I said, trying to justify decades of behavior I now knew was deeply wrong. No, Grandma. A mother teaches her children to be independent. A grandmother loves them, but she doesn't turn them into parasites. Haley took my hands in hers. Her hands were warm. Mom told me yesterday that if you sell the properties, we'll have to move to a smaller place. She said it like it was some kind of tragedy that we'd have to live on the money Dad actually earns. The brutal honesty from my granddaughter left me speechless. I had raised 2 children who didn't know the value of $1, because they had never been forced to earn one. And now they were raising their own children with that same toxic mentality of entitlement and dependency. Haley, did you know that your Aunt Tiffany didn't invite me to her wedding? I asked, needing to know just how far this family conspiracy went. Haley nodded sadly. Mom told me about it like it was normal. She said Aunt Tiffany wanted an elegant wedding and that you wouldn't fit in. She looked down at our hands. I asked her how she could exclude her own mother from her wedding, and she told me I wouldn't understand because I was too young. Haley squeezed my hands. But I do understand, Grandma. I understand that they're ashamed of you because you're real, because you worked your butt off for everything you have, because you don't pretend to be something you're not. In that moment, seeing my granddaughter defend my dignity when my own children were trampling all over it, I made my final decision. Haley was the only one who deserved my inheritance. the only one who had inherited my true values, not just my bank account. Haley, I need you to help me with something very important. But it will require you to keep some secrets, even from your parents. My voice had become conspiratorial, all business. What do you need, Grandma? Haley leaned forward, her eyes shining with curiosity. I need you to help me organize a family meeting. I want everyone here. Saturday night. Tell them I have something very important to announce about my future. I smiled, a coldness I hadn't felt in years creeping into it. And I need you to bring your phone and record everything that's about to happen. Haley looked at me with a mix of admiration and worry. Grandma, what are you planning? Justice, sweetheart. After 64 years of life, I'm finally going to serve this family a dish of very cold justice. I took my granddaughter's hands in mine. And you are going to witness a woman reclaiming her dignity. That night, after Haley left, I sat in my study and finished preparing my arsenal. Bank transfers, account statements, screenshots of Brittany's extravagant social media posts, call recordings. All of it was meticulously organized into 2 folders, one for Tiffany and one for Kevin. Saturday would be the day the Callahan family would finally understand who had been controlling the money all along. On Saturday night, they all arrived at my house at exactly 8 p.m. Just as I had requested. Tiffany arrived first, looking elegant but nervous, carrying a bouquet of expensive lilies she had probably charged to my credit card. Kevin and Brittany arrived 5 minutes later, with Haley trailing behind them, her phone discreetly ready in her pocket. Mom, it's so good you brought us all together. We haven't had a family dinner in so long, Tiffany said, kissing my cheek with lips that tasted of rehearsed lies. Yes, well, I needed to talk to all of you about some important decisions I've made, I replied, gesturing for them to sit in the living room. I had prepared coffee and cookies just like in the old days when we were an actual family. Brittany settled onto the sofa, constantly checking her phone. Kevin couldn't stop tapping his foot, a nervous wreck. Tiffany smiled too much, that forced, brittle smile she used when she wanted something. Only Haley seemed calm, sitting in the armchair in the corner, observing everything with those intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Well, as you all know, lately I've been reflecting a lot on my future, on what will happen to me when I get older. I began pouring coffee into the cups Tiffany had picked out for me last year. And I've also been thinking about all of you, about your lives, about everything you've achieved. Tiffany leaned forward. Mom, you're perfectly fine. You don't need to be worrying about those things yet. Of course I do, Tiffany. At my age, you have to be realistic, I said, taking a sip of coffee, savoring the moment. That's why I've made some very important decisions. About my estate. The silence in the room grew thick. Kevin stopped tapping his foot. Brittany looked up from her phone. Tiffany maintained her strained smile, but I saw the muscles in her neck tense up. First, I want to tell you about a very interesting conversation I had with Harrison, Chadwick's brother. I directed my gaze at Tiffany, who instantly turned pale. Turns out, he had no idea you were expecting a financial contribution from his family for the wedding. That was just a misunderstanding. Tiffany started to speak, but I held up a hand to silence her. Let me finish, sweetheart. Harrison was very interested when I told him about all the properties I own, about how I've been financing my family for years. I smiled sweetly. He thought it was very generous of me to be supporting adult children, who have their own professional careers. Kevin cleared his throat. Mom, we're not being supported. We have jobs, our own incomes. Really, Kevin? I pulled out the first folder of documents I had prepared. Because according to my records in the last 5 years alone, I have transferred $1,200,000 directly to you. Your salary as a lawyer is respectable, but without my help, you couldn't even pay the property taxes on your house, let alone the mortgage. Kevin fell silent. Brittany shot him a look that was a mixture of panic and reproach. It was obvious she didn't know the exact figures of their financial dependency. And you, Tiffany? I pulled out the second folder. In the same period, you've received $1,600,000. Your job as an architect allows you to live comfortably, but not for the penthouse in Beverly Hills, or the BMW, or the trips to Europe. Tiffany tried to maintain her composure. Mom, those were loans. Investments in our future. Loans. I laughed, but it was not a happy sound. It was sharp and cold. Tiffany, show me a single document that establishes repayment terms. Show me a single piece of paper where you acknowledge that you owe me money. Total crushing silence. Because those documents didn't exist. They had never for 1 second intended to pay me back. But the most interesting part, I continued, my voice low and steady, is that during all these years that I have given you millions of dollars, you have both decided that I am not good enough to be present in your important lives. I took out my phone and played the recording of Tiffany talking about the wedding. Her own voice filled the room, cold and cruel. Of course, I'm not inviting my mother. Can you imagine the scene she'll make in front of Chadwick's family? Tiffany shot to her feet as if she'd been electrocuted. Mom, you recorded that conversation? I didn't record anything, Tiffany. You simply forgot to hang up the phone when you were talking to Brittany. I lied with an icy calm. For 20 minutes, I listened to you talk about me as if I were a shameful nuisance that needed to be managed. Kevin tried to mediate. Tiffany, is that true? Did you really say those things? It's not what it sounds like. I was stressed, I was worried about the wedding. Tiffany stammered, all of her studied elegance evaporating in an instant. You were worried about looking bad in front of your fiancé's family. A family that, by the way, isn't contributing a single dollar to your $800,000 wedding. My voice had become sharp as a razor. A wedding that I am expected to fully finance, but to which I am not invited. Brittany finally spoke, her voice small and nervous. Martha, there must be an explanation for all of this. The explanation is very simple, Brittany. My children have lived like millionaires on my money, but they are ashamed of the woman who worked herself to the bone to give it to them. I stood up, feeling an energy I hadn't experienced in years. And that is why I have made some definitive decisions. About my future and about yours. Effective immediately, all credit cards in your names are cancelled. All monthly bank transfers are permanently suspended. And I have instructed my lawyer to begin the process of transferring all properties currently in your names back into my legal control. My voice was as firm as steel. Each word was calculated for maximum impact. Tiffany leaped from her seat. Mom, you can't do that. I have commitments, scheduled payments. Of course I can, Tiffany. They are my cards, my money, my properties. I only put them in your names for tax purposes, but legally, they have always been mine. I pulled out another folder, this one full of legal documents. Jean has already prepared all the paperwork. It all goes into effect on Monday morning. Kevin looked utterly devastated. Mom, we have a mortgage. Haley's school. The life we've built. The life I built for you, Kevin. With my work, my money, my sacrifice. I turned to him with an icy calm. And now you are both going to learn how to build your own lives. With your own resources. Brittany was now crying silently. Tiffany was pacing the room like a caged animal. Kevin had his head in his hands. Only Haley remained serene, discreetly recording the entire implosion. This is emotional blackmail. Tiffany shouted. You're punishing us for a private conversation. Emotional blackmail? My laugh was cold and sharp. Tiffany, you plan to get married on my dime at a party you refused to invite me to, and you think I'm the blackmailer? Chadwick is going to call everything off. His family is going to think we're grifters. Tiffany was completely losing control. Perhaps you should have thought of that before you called your mother an embarrassment to his family. I sat back down calmly, enjoying watching her unravel. But don't worry, Tiffany. I have a proposal. They all looked at me with a sliver of desperate hope. You can have the money for the wedding. The $400,000 you asked for. But on one condition. I let the silence hang in the air. I sit at the head table next to you. You introduce me proudly as your hardworking mother who financed your entire life and education. And in your speech, you publicly thank the woman who made your life of luxury possible. Tiffany turned ghostly pale. I can't do that. Chadwick's family. Then there's no money. And without my money, there's no wedding. I shrug. You decide what's more important, Tiffany. Your fake image or your marriage. Kevin tried one last desperate plea. Mom, please think about it. We're your family. Your only children. My only children who are ashamed of me. Who lied to me? Who used me as an ATM? I stood up and walked over to Haley. But I'm not completely cruel. Haley is not to blame for having parasitic parents. I placed my hand on my granddaughter's shoulder. Haley, you will remain my sole beneficiary. When I die, everything will be yours. Furthermore, when you turn 18, you will also have access to an educational trust one have created specifically for you. Haley hugged me tightly. Thank you, Grandma. But I just want you to be happy. I'm going to be happy, sweetheart. For the first time in years. I looked at my children, who were watching me with a mixture of shock and desperation. I'm moving next week. I've bought a beautiful condo in Naples, Florida, right on the water. Haley can visit whenever she wants. You're moving? Kevin looked completely lost. What about this house? I'm selling it. I already have a buyer. I smiled with genuine satisfaction. A lovely young couple who planned to fill it with real love, not transactions. Tiffany collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing. Mom, you can't destroy our family like this. I didn't destroy anything, Tiffany. You destroyed this family the moment you decided my money was more valuable than my presence. I walked to the door and opened it. The meeting is over. You have until Wednesday to collect your personal things from my house. 3 months later, I was sitting on the terrace of my new condo, drinking my morning coffee as I watched the sunrise over the Gulf of Mexico. Haley came to visit every other weekend, telling me about her university plans, her dreams of studying business administration. She was the only one who had inherited my entrepreneurial spirit. Tiffany called off the wedding. Chadwick left her the moment he learned the truth about her financial situation. Kevin and Brittany had to sell the Calabasas house and move into a small apartment. They both got second jobs to make ends meet. They never apologized. They never acknowledged their mistake. But they also never asked me for money again. I found peace in the silence. In the mornings by the water. In the afternoons reading all the books I had never had time to enjoy. In the nights planning Haley's business future. I had learned the most important lesson of my life. That true love can't be bought with money. And that a person's dignity is priceless. My children chose money over love. I chose my peace over their parasitism. And I never ever looked back. 2 years after that night that changed everything, I received an unexpected call. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was watering my orchids on the terrace when the phone rang. The name on the screen made me pause. Kevin. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded different. More mature, tired. I know I have no right to call you after so long, but I needed to talk to you. I sat in my favorite wicker chair, the one I had bought with my own savings, without asking for anyone's opinion. Go on, Kevin. Mom, Brittany and I are getting a divorce. His voice broke slightly. It turns out that when your money ran out, she realized she didn't love the man I really am. She loved the lifestyle you gave us. I felt neither satisfaction nor sadness, just a kind of cosmic inevitability. I'm sorry to hear that, Kevin. No, you're not, Mom. And you're right not to be. He paused for a long time. These past 2 years have been the hardest of my life, but they've also been the most honest. For the first time in decades, I had to face who I really am without your money as a shield. I could hear the background noise of a coffee shop. He was somewhere public, probably having gathered the courage for this call for hours. And who are you, Kevin? I asked with genuine curiosity. I'm a mediocre lawyer who for years felt entitled to his mother's money. I'm a father who taught his daughter that money is something you ask for, not something you earn. I'm a man who was ashamed of the hardest working woman he has ever known. His voice trembled. I'm a coward who let his sister mistreat you because it was financially convenient for me. His words were like knives, but they were knives that were finally cutting in the right direction, carving away the rot. Mom, I'm not calling to ask for money. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I'm calling to tell you that I finally understand what you did to us. Kevin took a deep breath. You forced us to grow up. I remained silent, processing his words. Outside, an elderly couple walked hand in hand along the waterfront path. I had been watching them take the same walk every afternoon for 2 years. I always wondered if that's what true love looked like. Kevin, how is Haley? That was the only question that truly mattered to me. Haley is incredible. She got a 4.0 this semester. She got a part-time job at an accounting firm. She says she wants to learn the value of money before she inherits yours. Kevin let out a small laugh, but it wasn't bitter. She's just like you, Mom. She has that same determination, that same business savvy. And Tiffany? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. He sighed. Tiffany is working at a small architecture firm. She lives in a modest apartment, drives a used car. She looks real for the first time in years. But she's also furious. Furious with you. Furious with me. Furious with the world. Furious about what? Because she discovered that all the important connections she thought she had were actually just connections to your money. When the expensive dinners and lavish gifts stopped, so did the fake friendships. He paused. Chadwick married an heiress 6 months after he left her. I stood up from my chair and walked to the railing of the terrace. The sun was beginning to set, painting the water in shades of gold and orange. It was a sight I never got tired of. Kevin, why are you telling me all of this? Because I want you to know that your plan worked. You broke us in order to rebuild us. And even though Tiffany still doesn't get it, I do. His voice had become firm. I want you to know that I'm learning to be a better man. And Brittany? How is she handling the divorce? Kevin laughed, a genuinely bitter sound this time. Brittany already has a new boyfriend, an older businessman who supports her just like I used to support her with your money. Some people never learn. We were silent for several minutes. I watched the sunset. He probably stared into his cold coffee in some anonymous cafe. Mom, there's something else I need to tell you. Kevin took a deep breath. The day you turned 66, Haley asked me why we didn't call you to wish you a happy birthday. I didn't know what to tell her. My birthday had passed quietly. Haley had visited, bringing a homemade cake and a handmade card. It had been perfect. I didn't need any calls, Kevin. Yes, you did, Mom. And we needed to make them. But we were too proud, our egos too bruised to admit that we missed you. He was quiet for a moment. I missed you. Not as an ATM. But as a mother. I felt something wet on my cheeks and realized I was crying. Not from sadness but from something far more complex. Relief maybe. Perhaps even a sliver of hope. Kevin, what do you expect from this call? Nothing, Mom. Absolutely nothing. I just wanted you to know that the man you raised still exists, somewhere under all the garbage I piled on top of him. His voice broke again. And I wanted you to know that I'm proud to be the son of Martha Callahan, the woman who built an empire with her own 2 hands. I hung up the phone and stood there, watching the last sliver of daylight fade over the water. For the first time in 2 years, I felt something that resembled hope for my family. Maybe true love can't be bought with money. But sometimes, just maybe, it can be found in the silence that remains when the money is finally gone.